Hey, what's up? Well, I'm here to make another video. I hope I don't regret this. You know, it would be nice if this silly refrigerator would go off. But I think I found a better solution. See, I'm wearing my anchor pendant, one of them. The one that's got this little non-removable blue counterweight behind it to try to keep it from getting flipped around. And I'm wearing my anchor ring and my anchor earrings, okay? Because this is the time of year when that stuff really appeals to me the most. Okay, not that it doesn't appeal to me other times of year, but just like Christmas stuff has a season, and so does fall and spring, so does nautical theme stuff. Well, without further ado, I realized in my other video that I forgot at least one of the diagrams. And as always, I've made more sense. So I think I'm going to save this one for my birthday to be posted. Because, I mean, let's face it, I don't have much time, unfortunately. I'm 41 right now, but we'll be 42 by the time this gets posted. So, I would like to unbox just a few more things and explain their significance and post a diagram or two that I've made since then, because I just never get tired of that. That's become my new favorite hobby. Beginning in April, and there's the air. So, what I want to talk about in this video, first of all, let's get started with this pretty hologram envelope. And I'm being careful not to show the front, because for once, the seller on eBay lives in my state. And this is one of the items, and this is the other. It's Tom Tom, which I'm finding out more about Cocomelon. And it's that cute little girl with the glasses. And Tom Tom is the twin brother of Yo-Yo Girl and the older brother of Baby J. And I'm finding out, let's see, what is that girl's name? I kind of forgot. But I got her because she was one of the few light-eyed girls. See, that's what I like about this cartoon. It's around the time when, just like on Sophia the First, the in thing was to have light-haired characters with dark eyes and dark-haired characters with light eyes. See how he's got brown hair and green eyes? That's Tom Tom. And, see, that's the oldest brother, or the twin brother. And Cocomelon was so much better than Rugrats. But what I like about that cartoon, or in Sophia the First, is how, you know, they started to realize that while in the real world, people tend to have light and dark eyes, or people tend to have both dark hair and eyes, or light hair and eyes. Or, if they deviate from that, it tends to be darker hair, lighter eyes. But people started, you know, making characters with blonde hair and brown eyes, like Princess Amber and Prince James on Sophia the First. And JJ was very similar to that. So, I have 2 boys and 2 girls from the Cocomelon series. And if I figure out what that girl with the glasses name is, I'll post it. The other thing I wanted to unbox is from AliExpress, which took about the same amount of time as the other package. I ordered 2 dolls, 2 male dolls, and I had to cut into them before making this video because, I mean, they're wrapped in layer upon layer upon layer. It's like you have to cut through so many layers that it's unbelievable. As you well know, I have no idea what I'm going to find And this, you know, it could have been worse. He could have been packaged with his head off, like so many. Really, I was kind of hoping to do this one first. The redhead, who looks unnaturally red with his eyebrows, and that's awesome, just like the blondes. He has brown eyebrows. You know, eyebrows should just be brown no matter what. But he has orange red hair, which is extremely uncommon for a male doll. Adult males are just not usually redheads in the doll world. Because, as stated before with that melanin chart, what happens is women and children have the highest percentage of pheomelanin, which is red melanin. And when you're born with blonde hair, you have very little melanin at all. But what little bit you have tends to be pheomelanin. So that's a blonde. If you're born redheaded, there's a lot of pheomelanin, but very little eumelanin, the dark melanin. Okay, and the reason why there aren't a lot of red-haired men, well, for one thing, they just think it's hard enough to sell a male doll with a more common hair color, like brown or black, with pretty blue eyes. But very few men retain, if they're born redheaded as a child, they rarely retain that hair color into adulthood. Because as you go through puberty, if you're naturally blondes, you tend to have more eumelanin. So that if you're blonde, you gradually turn golden brown, light brown. You know, like if Baby J got older as a real person, he'd probably have light brown hair. But if you're redheaded, a lot of times what will happen is the pheomelanin will decrease. You know, because old people have very little pheomelanin. That's why they're gray instead of blonde. And so your pheomelanin that makes it red would decrease. And if you don't have a lot of eumelanin ever, well, you'd become a strawberry blonde. So a lot of red-haired guys become more like a strawberry blonde or dark blonde. And, you know, they lose their hair as they get older. So they either become auburn or light brown or a strawberry blonde if they never have that much eumelanin. Because the pheomelanin fades with age, and especially in men. So that most redheads as adults are women. So, not only is it one of the least common hair colors in general, but for a man to retain it as an adult would be incredibly rare. Which is why he'd almost have to be, you know, he'd almost have to be dyeing it that color. Sort of like the natural platinum blondes. There aren't a lot of men with these two hair colors naturally as adults. So, the reason why Mattel never, well, until recently, with the exception of the Allen doll who had auburn hair, they didn't make a lot of red-headed Kens. You know, unless he was like some character in a movie like Peter Pan. You know, red-haired Kens were pretty much non-existent. And I was reminded of that, oddly enough. You know that stuff at a beauty salon, that expensive shampoo called Red Ken? And it's funny because it's like, you're at a beauty salon, so you're thinking about Barbie and all that. And so the bottle being red and saying Red Ken always reminded me, you know, that's what I wish I could have, a red-haired Ken. And I even tried to create one by repainting a Ken's hair. And that didn't turn out quite as well as I wish it would have. So, yeah, the reason I buy from AliExpress, not because I enjoy buying things from China and waiting 2 weeks to get them, not because I enjoy cutting through layers upon layers of packaging instead of going to the Dollar Tree and buying something, you know, in a regular box that I could open in 2 seconds. or Walmart even. But it's because there are just certain things that they have recently made available that they just don't have in the US, because capitalism, and you can only manufacture what you can sell, and if there's not enough of demand for it, then, you know, they can't make it because nobody would buy it. It's too bad you can't like have a custom, I've always said this, I wish you could have a custom doll site where you could literally design your own dolls, you know, just like you can draw pictures. You can have a child draw a picture or even draw it yourself and have an expensive plushie made out of it to the best of their ability, which I would never go that route because it's ridiculous. You know, you could pay $50 for something that they get way wrong on so many levels, so many ways they don't get it right, but you're stuck with it because you paid a lot and you're committed to liking it. So anyway, there's my red-haired Ken, which I think I recently had one that was Mattel, and he was very similar to this, you know, brown eyebrows, orange hair. But, you know, just like platinum blonde hair, you know, a grown man would almost have to dye his hair to look like that, which is why they didn't really manufacture a lot of men with that color. Because, you know, with men, it's like you had to have some level of normalcy, you know, or some level of attractiveness, which is usually dark hair and blue eyes, if people could have their choice. And a dark blonde Ken, you know, was the most common look for many years, because, I mean, you know, that could represent a blonde or a redhead whose pheomelanin had faded, but whose eumelanin was kept low by going out in the sun. And so, yeah, dark blonde and light brown or medium brown were the most common hair colors for male dolls with blue eyes. And of course you had your ethnic versions, but other variations were rare. And the other thing I want to talk about is this guy who I really wanted. I was more excited about him because another thing about AliExpress is they just manufacture things differently, or they create things in ways that, I mean, this may have been a character or something, but they make it seem like he could just be an ordinary guy with that face or that head sculpt. And to me, you know, others may disagree, but to me, this is a Percy Jackson doll. This is Percy Jackson. And the other thing I bought was clothing, you know, because we can't have them going nude. And I bought two of the cheapest clothing that I liked. Let's see, where does it open? But yeah, it would be, would I rather buy from the US? Absolutely. You know, would I rather if these could be Walmart special, or, you know, Walmart Mattel dolls? Absolutely. But you see, the thing is, they can only be so adventurous with Ken. Ken, you know, Barbie could be anything, you know, the theme is be anything. She could look any kind of way in the world and still be in demand. But Ken, he had to just be the plain old ordinary dark hair, light-eyed guy with a tan in order to sell. And even then, you know, he still doesn't sell as much as he should. But to me, although he may not look, you may not see that resemblance. Hold on, I'm trying to get his pants on him. You know, that's the thing. It's like they're a little bit tight at first. But he can't be naked. Can't be having no naked Ken dolls. And I'm going to put shoes on him. So, to the best of my ability, you know, I'm sure I could have paid more to have an outfit that would be slightly more like it is in the movies. But to me, this is the closest I can get for now to a Percy Jackson doll. Who is Percy Jackson? Well, he's someone I just recently found out about. He's like a Harry Potter type character. And this one, I bought this kind of student looking outfit. You know, at first I didn't know if that wouldn't be his outfit. But I figured with the blue eyes, you know, this would look nice. So Percy Jackson, he's sort of like a Harry Potter in that he's like a young demigod. I guess wizards weren't as cool anymore. And, well, that's what he is. He's like a teenage demigod, whatever that is. And I don't even remember how I found out about him. But, yeah, it's like a series of books. And he's sort of like coming of age, like Harry Potter. Takes him all the way from, say, age 11 or 12 to about 18, a senior in high school. And so he's this young demigod coming of age, realizing that his father is Poseidon. And the books actually predate Sophia the First. But the oldest movie was from 2010 or 2009 or 10, and you can totally tell. You know, everything from the Lady Gaga poker face being included to the Justin Bieber hairdo of Logan Lerman, and he has since been replaced by Walker Scobell, who is, as I've stated before, you know, these young kids that start off blonde, he's sort of becoming light brown haired like Elvis did. But a lot of times they'll choose a guy like that, you know, because they have the blue eyes, you know, of someone born blonde, but they can darken their hair just a little bit to brown instead of black, you know, because the book describes him as having, you know, Harry Potter's features, you know, blue or green eyes with black hair, black in quotes like mine. So he's a dark-haired, light-eyed boy that I think would make a very good Ken doll. You know, he's about 17 years old by the end of it, so, and in the movies, so that you wouldn't need to have like a child's body or a child actor whose voice hadn't changed. And you could have a young man. And, so, you know, making a Ken doll, I would think, would be very easy for Percy Jackson. You could just get the clothing right and you have it. You know, he's just a plain Ken doll with that actor's face. And, so yeah, I think this comes pretty close. You know, if this was orange and it said Camp Half-Blood and he were wearing blue jeans. But I don't remember how I found out about him. But I know that he intrigued me for two reasons. Okay, number one, you know, just like Cedric on Sophia the First, you know, he's a wizard or a demigod, and that appeals to my fantasy. You know, it doesn't matter what you call him. He's like a magical person, you know, a humanoid with magical powers, basically. It doesn't matter if it's a fairy, a demigod, a wizard, a sorcerer, an elf. You know, they're all one and the same to me. It doesn't really matter what name you give these magical people. It's like the combination of, you know, having a human body and all the workings thereof, if you know what I mean, but also being magical or special or godlike in some way. You know, that just appeals to something about me that I can't explain. And I know my parents would find disturbing, which is why I don't discuss it with them. You know, I don't say, hey, Mom and Dad, let's watch a Harry Potter movie together. Although my dad would probably do it and go to sleep on it. Or, hey, Mom, let's watch this Sophia the First movie. No, because I don't really want to explain to my parents. I don't care to explain to my parents why at 42 years old, yeah, this fantasy about being an alien or a demigod or whatever you call such a person, but yet having physical weaknesses, sort of like a human still, because you still have a human body. Why that appeals to me, because at a deeper philosophical level, it's very disturbing, and I know it. And they wouldn't understand, you know, because they just sort of played along with this life called normalcy. And anything that deviates from that, anything to do with fantasy, it disturbs them and they want nothing to do with. So, Percy Jackson, he just fascinates me enough, just for being what he is. And, as I've stated before, just like with Cedric, having a name that is somewhat off the beaten path, but still in the name book, it appeals to me because that's exactly the life that I must live. The life that I was condemned to live at birth. Having a name that sort of sets you apart from everyone else. But yet people don't understand, what's the big deal, because it's still in the name book and it's technically a name, But, being named Percy, it's just cool because, just like Cedric, it has a very similar vibe to Cedric and I guess Nigel to a lesser extent, and Winston, and As Told by Ginger. It's one of those outdated British type names that people that never really caught on in the US, and most people sort of stopped using in the UK because they had some kind of a soft or feminine connotation. Like with Cedric, that sounds like a softer version of Frederick. And so if someone liked that sound, they would probably just go with Frederick and call him Fred or Freddie. But Cedric, it's just very cool because it's like a soft C, and it's a little off the beaten path, but you can still recognize it as a human male name. And same thing with Percy. That name has two other associations in my mind that play into what I'm about to explain that would shock people about Percy Jackson, which is why he'll remain unforgettable even if I never read any of the books or watch any of the movies. And, it's like there's two other characters named Percy that I can remember. And they both connect to this thing that I'm going to talk about. But what people would find hard to believe is that that's what confirms what I believe about these other subjects that I'm talking about, with Angelica and with Cedric and all these other things, is have in one of the books, now I'm sure they would leave this out of the movie, I would hope, because no actor would be willing to play such a part or do such a thing. They literally have him pooping in his pants. Oh my gosh, that is like the title of the first chapter of this book that came out a year ago. I guess I'll post the title. I don't remember what it's called, but I could post the title. So he's pooping in his pants at age 17, which is unimaginable to me. Because the principal is Hecate, Hecate, and she transforms into this three-headed monster and, disappears in a burst of fire. So it's very similar. It's like they distract you with the magical element, the things that could never happen in real life, in order to have something like that happen, okay? In a way that it would either be brushed off or, they'd probably just omit that from a movie, I would hope, because I'm sure Walker Scoville would never want to, say such a thing for any amount of money. But it has him pooping in his pants, and people would find that very hard to believe, at 17 years old, if he's some kind of a demigod or something like that. But it really does make sense in the context of the other two characters that were named Percy that I can recall. And of course, the reason why most people wouldn't name their son Percy, it comes from Percival. But it does sound kind of silly because it sounds like a pet name for a woman's purse. Go get mama's Percy. It sounds like a purse. And most people wouldn't name their son that because he'd get made fun of. So the other Percy, the first character I recall being named Percy, was in Lord of the Flies, which is probably where a lot of inspiration for that third Rugrats movie came from. And so he's twice the age of Angelica, about 6 years old. His name is Percy, but of course his real name is Percival. And what I remember about him is he's the little boy that was crying because he had pee and poop running down his legs, and he was like in a horrible condition. And when asked his name, it's like such embarrassment that he had this sophisticated name and family history, but yet here he was, this 6-year-old child on an island with pee and poop running down his legs. And oh my gosh, I even showed my mom. I was just flabbergasted by some of the graphic descriptions of these characters' bowel functions in this book, Lord of the Flies. When I read it at age 14, I mean, that was one of the many reasons why I got out of gifted language arts or English. I mean, I wanted to be put in a regular class because a lot of the books, they wanted us to read more advanced books, novels, that were longer and thicker and, at a more advanced reading level. Well, the drawback to that is you get exposed to a lot of adult things that my mom knew I was not mentally ready for, like orgies. When I showed her a book and asked her what is an orgy, she demanded that I go to school and have my book changed to another one. So, it's like I was childlike in the way that I wanted to make straight 100s, if at all possible. What the hell they had against straight 100s, I do not understand. Why was it so bad for me to stay in a low-level, regular class and make straight 100s with a few 99s occasionally? As opposed to, they wanted to always force me into these advanced classes and try to challenge me more. Well, that defeats the whole purpose of me being red-shirted, and put in kindergarten at 6 instead of 5. If my mom thought I was ready to handle more advanced stuff at a younger age, she'd have put me in effing kindergarten at age 5. But it always infuriated me how all these teachers wanted us to be more advanced and more challenged. They didn't like us making straight 100s. Well, my mom fought them every step of the way, and I helped her do it. Because we did not need to be put in these stupid gifted English classes where they force you to read like adult level books, that expose you to sexual things. And in the case of Lord of the Flies, I got through it all right. I didn't change books that time, but later on, as I was being forced to read even more advanced stuff in that, oh my God, I don't remember the title, but there was this book that literally had a woman like passing out in a church and pooping herself, or mentioning that she was losing control of her bowels. And she was an old lady with a 10-year-old grandson. And because that book was like 300 pages long, it was the main reason I wanted out of that class. I wanted, to be put in a regular class. But I mean, I just could not believe, I was totally appalled sometimes in school as I would read these books. It's like, oh my God, how can they literally mention excrement in this book? And so Lord of the Flies, I had that little 6-year-old boy named Percy having pooped himself and, crying because he was so ashamed, that he was so sophisticated, kind of like Blake Gripling on As Told by Ginger, who also had an accident in his pants on Halloween. He was so sophisticated, but yet he was pooping his pants in front of everyone, or he had it running down his legs. And, oh my gosh, they had like graphic descriptions of people literally taking a crap on the ground in that book. So, and so that's one Percy. Another Percy, of course, is in The Green Mile. The warden guy that was an asshole that, took pleasure in not wetting the sponge, and, the Green Mile. And I mean, that movie was disturbing enough, but at one point, Percy, his name is Percy Wetmore, and he peed on himself, and it, ran down the leg of his officer suit and his uniform. And so there's two Percys, they're mentioned as having accidents on themselves. And so Percy Jackson, at 17 years old, and I know that it's poop because they mention him having a burrito. He ate a pumpkin spice burrito, so why would they tell you what he was eating? And the way that it's written, his stomach seemed to dissolve into his jeans. Oh my God, it's like, I mean, the title was, he has an accident at the principal's, and then he changes into his gym shorts from the waist down and goes through the rest of the day at school. Well, okay, for me, it fits perfectly in line, his name being Percy, and, because that's what's cool about it. Just like Cedric, it's a name that you would associate with a more sophisticated type guy. Sort of a softer, more sissified, I don't want to get dirty and go outside kind of guy. But what's cool is, you know, reading a book or watching a movie wherein such guys are forced to go outside and defeat monsters and do amazing, heroic, or villainous things. You know what I'm saying? When you have like a softer, more sophisticated guy, you know, like Nigel Thornberry, and, you know, just a guy with a name like that, but yet he still, you know, does these amazing outdoor things that would be impressive for a guy named John or David, if you know what I mean. So, Percy Jackson. This video is 30 minutes long, so I guess I'll go ahead and post it along with some more diagrams.